Hello everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth and this is my game analysis from my game of round 6 of the German Bundesliga, and I played against Grandmaster Alexander Donchenko, very strong and talented young German player. So my team was playing against Aachen, Hamburg against Aachen. I was playing on board 4 against Donchenko, and we had played before 5 years ago when he wasn't as strong yet. Right now he's having rating of 2585, so he was a slight favorite in this game. Back in the day he had less rating, and he actually also played this line. Didn't really know how to make the transition here. He did also play this line, which is the perk, and I was surprised by this. But okay, it is a decent line, I would say, and I play like I always play against it with the 3-pawn attack, quite well, straightforward, ambitious, knight f6, and here bishop d3. So I first actually deviated from our last encounter in 2011 when I went knight f3, and then he played c5. And in fact, the point of going bishop d3 is to stop c5, because then white could just take with the d-pawn, and it's just in a good spot. Now we went bishop g4, and I played knight f3, and here he went knight c6, a move I wasn't familiar with, and obviously is attacking my pawn on d4 once more, and I played d5, which is interesting, maybe not the best, but I didn't like the alternatives either. If e5, then, well, black could take and go knight d5, but in fact there's something even better. There was a game kayaking against Wang Hao, and black can take on f3, forcing white to take with the g-pawn because of the queen takes. There's knight takes d4, and yeah, this is not too pretty with these pawns, so that wouldn't be great. And the other move available, the obvious development move, bishop e3, could be answered by e5, and also here it seems like it's fine. So I need to recheck this whole line. Haven't had a chance yet, but this is definitely very much playable for black. d5, now knight d4 nonetheless, since this knight is pinned. Bishop e3, I'm trying to get rid of this knight on d4 as quickly as I can. c5, now d takes c6 en passant, and here my opponent took on f3. And I took back immediately. Actually, there was an alternative, which I didn't even consider, the move c7. But does make a big difference. Still, always consider alternatives. Always make sure before you recapture a piece or play a seemingly forced move that you don't have any other move available, that you're not missing anything. So I took on f3, knight takes c6, queen d2. Of course, I'm aiming for the queenside castle here because my kingside is already open up. And we kind of have a dragon position here, but a little bit different because obviously black has taken on f3, which is usually not a situation you see in the dragon since the knight is on d4. So it is similar in some ways, but also different. Played queen a5. Now I thought he might want to go queenside castle, so I played bishop c4. Attacking this pawn on f7. Now he cannot go queenside castle anymore because I would just take it. So he castled kingside and I castled queenside. And we have this typical situation in a dragon with opposite sided castles. You know what I mean. One castle on the queen side, the other on the king side. And both sides are trying to attack each other. So my ideas are here to go f5 or h4, h5 and try to open up some lines. Some files, excuse me, and black will try to get counterplay via the c file. So he went rook f8, play bishop b3, because the bishop has to move anyway, and now queen h5, which seems to be an inaccuracy. Black should go knight d7 here, with the idea to play knight c5, and probably my best bet would be to go knight d5, go into his endgame here, which maybe white is a tiny bit better, but it's really not that much. I mean, the only white edge lies in the fact that he has the bishop pair here. And a little bit of more space, maybe. Queen h5 makes a lot of sense because it is vacating The square on a5 for the knight, and knight a5, knight c4 is black's idea. But the queen is a little bit offside here. That's the problem. Here I play queen f2. Queen e2 first seemed more natural to cover the c4 square, but the problem is that my queen is standing in some tactics here. Just to illustrate, after king b1, black has this typical exchange sacrifice, followed up by knight takes e4, and here we see a problem. This pawn is pinned. My queen would be hanging then on e2, so I cannot do that. So that's why I put my queen on f2, knight a5, and now I played knight d5. I was quite happy with this move, but f5 is much better. With the same idea actually as knight d5, it's about cutting off the queen from the rest of the board, and also in some cases even trying to trap it on h5. Just to see some sample lines here, knight c4 takes, rook takes, and now h4 is a great move, introducing all these ideas of rook hg1, rook g5, and so on. And this means trouble for black. Rook g1 and bishop h6, bishop g5, and what is this queen doing there in h5? It's just bad. It's just really difficult for black, this position. I mean, there's no immediate win maybe, but as you can guess, if you're playing without your queen, you're in a lot of trouble. And just to point out, g takes f5 can always be answered by rook g1, and there's trouble for black on the g file. So I played knight d5 with a similar idea, as we will see, but it's not as strong. He took on b3, and now had to take on d5, because otherwise it's difficult to protect this pawn. Rook takes, and the queen has to go to h3. And now I played f5. Same idea. The queen is out of the game for now, but I had missed an idea. Unfortunately, my opponent also missed it. He played the move e6, but strong would have been to go a5 here, to play a4 next move, and I don't really have a good way to deal with this. And if black gets a4 in, actually he develops a very nice attack against my king. Nice for him, obviously. And even though the queen is offside, it doesn't matter. Still, black has enough piece to really cause me trouble. So here I would need to force a queen trade, and then I cannot claim much in the endgame, obviously, since, well, I have exchanged the whole advantage I had, being that the queen is offside of black. So he had missed it, and he wanted to get his queen back, playing e6. Now black has got his queen back, but he had to do a compromise. He's left with a weak pawn on d6, and also my rook is very nicely placed on d5. So I was quite happy with my position here. Rook h1, rook c6, king b1, just a useful move anyway to put a king on b1, as it is often the case in the Sicilian. Rook a c8. Now I don't want to allow rook takes c2, even though, well, it's not that clear if it's that great, but why would you even allow it? Just c3, just stabilizing everything, and these sacrifices just never work for black. So this pawn on a7 is hanging, black plays a6, and I went h4, obviously with the idea h5 and opening up the black king position, and h5 is pretty much forced, and now I went bishop d4. And here he made a mistake. I mean, already his position is definitely worse. I'm much better. But bishop takes d4 helps tremendously. Helps me tremendously. Bishop f6 is what we looked at afterwards. To not allow my queen to come to d4, where it's just perfectly placed. And here rook g1, threatening rook takes h5, king h7. And now I could play a waiting move like king a2, or I could take on f6, go f4 once again, trying to open up the position on the king side, rook c5, rook d4, and still f5's in the position, followed by rook g5, or all these moves, and it's really not easy for black to play, but that would have been better. Just to point out real quick, why did I insert the moves h4 and h5? Well, now we can see why, because I have much more ideas. Sometimes this pawn is hanging, sometimes I have sacrifice on g6, just the black king position, or the pawns in front of the black king are a little bit more loose and are more vulnerable to sacrifices. So here it's not easy to even suggest a move for black, and he spent quite some time. Queen e7, which my opponent first wanted to play, and I would have been very happy to see this move, fails due to rook takes h5 already. Because after g takes h5, black is just getting mated, king h7, queen g7, and king f8, queen h8, checkmate. Another move my opponent considered, which is actually a good move, queen h3, runs into queen f6. The queen looks very strong here, but now black should just come back. Obviously, it's not good news if the best black can do is go into rook endgame pawn down, but here black has some drawing chances because there's counterplay attached to the pawns on the king side. So in fact, after queen h3, queen f6 isn't even the best move, believe it or not. Because after queen e6, this rook endgame isn't that clear. So queen f2 instead would be better. And once again, I'm maintaining a great positional edge here with the target on d6 and the rook being better placed, and also in some lines having this option of going f4, f5, opening up the black king. And black's just passive, not having much play. So tough position for black, and I felt very, very comfortable. Rook e8, rook g1, nonetheless, threatening rook takes h5, king f8 has to be played, king h7 of course would run right into rook takes h5. So king f8, now rook takes h5 doesn't work, king can always escape to e7. But I was wondering, well, what is black going to play here anyway? And it is almost a Zugzwang situation already. Obviously, you don't want to move your king anywhere. You don't want to move to e7. And yeah, black would like to just pass here pretty much, but that's not allowed in chess, so he played rook ec8. Not having an eye on this pawn anymore, which allows me to maybe go f4, f5. And actually, we will see this in a moment, but first I played rook d1. So I knew my position is really good here. Obviously, if your opponent barely has any moves, then that's a good sign, because it means you can just improve and your opponent more or less can just watch. So what is the right plan here? Well, there are actually two ways to play. Rook e1 I think would have been best and most straightforward. The point is to just prepare f4, f5 or f4, e5, either one. And just to look at some lines, if rook e8, now e5. And I might have looked at this briefly and thought, well, now I'm in this pin. But rook e4 is a very good move. Unpinning, well, not unpinning, but protecting the rook. And e takes d6 cannot be stopped really. And if d takes e5, obviously I'm just winning the rook. I also like how all these white pieces are in the center. It's just aesthetic. Best try would be to go rook c5. And now e takes d6, rook takes d5, rook takes e6. And black ends up with two rooks against the queen, but this will not be holdable. I'll pick up this pawn and weak black king, and this is winning for white. So to have this idea, e5, and if black doesn't go rook e8, goes another move, king g8, then I go f4, and f5 is... When I get f5 in without too much of a compromise, and I'm able to open up the black position, it's just always over. So that was the way to go. Another move is rook g5, but that's a little bit trickier to find. I guess it's the same idea, because here once again after rook e8 I can play e5. But this is trickier. You would need to figure out here that in this position black is just so passive, and I'm just winning here because once again I'm able to open up the position in my favor. But okay, this is tougher. Rook e1 was the most straightforward. But I didn't find it. I played rook d1, flirting with the idea of taking on d6, king g8. But I didn't take on d6, which is the right decision. I went back to g1. Because this rook endgame, as my feeling was telling me, doesn't offer white that much because of my weak king side. If that was a healthy pawn structure, well, that would be a different story. But here, black always has ideas connect to g5 and creating a strong passed pawn. So just to show you a sample line here, king g7, f4, rook e8, e5, and now g5, even now, and h6, g5, and h4. And this pawn I need to stop, and my king is just so far away from the action. So that's the problem here. So probably after g5 I would need to take with the f pawn, rook takes e5, and like I said, black has this counterplay attached to play on the king side. So definitely the right choice to go back, and he also went back, repeated moves once, and now I said, okay, I'm going to do something, played f4, but as I already said, I should have gone rook e1 here, because there is still a defense to f4. Queen h8, just to point out, I could have played this a number of times, but it really doesn't help me that much to drive the king to e7. The king is well placed here, and black would play rook c5, trade a pair of rooks, and be fine. So I went f4, rook e8, and now I went rook e1. f5 unfortunately doesn't work. You can just take on e4 and queen f6, queen takes d5. First it looks great, but turns out the king is just escaping, going all the way to b6, and then, you know, sometimes I have to watch out not being worse. So doesn't work. Does not work. So I played rook e1, and my next move will be f5, but he has rook c5 just in time, giving a pawn but neutralizing my attack. In fact, I'm still winning here, but the win was, well, I'll show you. It's just very tough. If now f5, black can take on d5, and actually I also looked at this, but it just didn't seem to yield anything. I mean, maybe I have an advantage if black takes on e6, but if he goes f6 or f5, I don't think there's anything at all. Completely unclear rook endgame. Maybe black is even better, so that was not an option. But the other main move I looked at, besides rook takes c5, which I played, was rook takes d6. Now the point is that here black can give this check and take on b3, and obviously has ideas of his own. But it turns out that after queen h8, king e7, queen f6, king f8, and now rook d8, white is winning. But it is not at all trivial to see. So let's go through some lines. So okay, black cannot take right now because of queen takes and winning the rook on a5, and I'm threatening queen h8. So black needs to do something. Queen a2 is the most natural, and then queen a4 check. Here is also another line I would like to show you. Black could now take on d8 and then can go king g7, but it turns out that with the black pieces being a little bit outside the game on the queen side, I can go f5, and this threat of f6 followed by a mating attack is very strong. Just some sample lines once again. I can just put my king on d3 and the rook cannot enter a game, and here queen f2, stopping f6, but f6 anyway because I am deflecting the queen from the attack of the rook, and now just take the rook on a5 and white wins. Or if king h7, then queen e7. Queen takes f7 is hard to stop. So that was rook takes d8. Now queen a4 check, but I can just go b3. I mean, I didn't even spend any time looking at this because, well, it looks so counterintuitive. Now queen a2 would lead to the same variation we just saw, king d3. And if queen c6, queen d4, all of these, by the way, only moves for white to keep winning. Queen d4 to keep the tension going. It turns out no useful moves for black here. The rook is kind of misplaced, and rook a2 check, I can go king b1, and if the rook goes somewhere over here, then rook d6. You see, I'm still smiling about all these lines, which of course the computer found for me, and this turns out to be winning once again because of rook d7 and numerous threats. Rook d8 and the rook on h2 looks nice, but not doing too much because black can't get his counterplay going. And if not rook a2 but king g8, then king b2, king h7. And I think even these are only moves for white to win. Queen e6 and c4. And white is just so active that he is winning here. But it's still, even here, not obvious from the position. I guess you can make the case that the rook is very much misplaced now on a5. And obviously white has nice and active pieces. So that was the way to do it. Obviously, earlier, the variation we saw of rook e1 was much simpler and clearer to find. So I took on c5, and I have an extra pawn here. Once again, I trust my intuition that the rook endgame wouldn't give me anything, and that was right. Queen f2 is a good move, if I may say so. Keeping an extra pawn, but not easy because, well, the extra pawn is a double pawn, and my king side isn't too healthy. e5, queen d8, great move. I mean, in general, I have to say my opponent just defended brilliantly here. We'll see some more good moves by him later on, but once he was in this difficult position, he did really everything he could to make my life as hard as possible. And here I had a good move, but I just didn't notice it at all. Obviously black wants to play queen a5, and put a queen on d5, and I would like to take control of the d file. So the way to do it was to go rook e4, so I can answer queen a5 check with rook e4, and I can put my rook on d4 here, or well, play queen a7 first or something like that, and I keep control. I have an extra pawn and I can try. This is still clearly better for white, but I missed this idea completely to go rook e4, which is really nice, and went queen g3 because I was hoping to get some play going here, and I already had foreseen this pawn sacrifice that is about to happen. Queen a5 check, king b1, queen d5, now threatening to take on b3. And I went f5 here. I think there's not much for white to try anyway in this position. So f5, g takes f5, and queen f4, and I open up the black king position, threatening now queen h6 check, which would be very uncomfortable. And I only expected queen e6, after which black is quite passive, and I have a good position here once again. But rook e6 is just such an important defensive move, and the only move for black to obtain equality. Now I took on f5. Yeah, the moves also don't give me anything. The rook is just perfectly placed now on the 6th rank, always able to go to his g6 to defend as well. So I took on f5 and he took on b3. I play queen takes h5. Rook f1 can be answered by rook b6, threatening mate, and after queen comes back, rook g6, and the king doesn't feel too unsafe anymore with the rook on g6, just all the black pieces are placed well. So I took on h5, up a pawn once again by rook b6, threatening mate. I have to come back with the queen, defend the mate, and now this pawn is hanging because of the pin, and I don't have anything going for me here, because there's also the threat rook takes b2. I'd actually previously thought I could go e6 here, which would be nice, with the idea of f takes e6, queen f2 check, and this cute little move. That would have been very nice. But what's not so nice is that after e6, rook takes b2, I'm losing, because black just picks up everything, and I can resign. So I had to move my rook. There's the threat of rook takes b2. So I moved it to d1 to not give black the option to put his queen on d4. And now queen g3, another good move. Not keeping now this pawn, but rather making sure that the black king is safe and taking control of the pawns here on the king side. Played h5 and rook e6, once again, good move. Attacking my pawn e5, and I was slowly getting a little bit worried here. That might be worse. I have to defend this pawn, obviously. Need to keep it, rook d5. Now queen g5, which is once more keeping an eye on this pawn. Otherwise I could maybe go queen e4, but now this is not possible. And here said, I'm not better anymore, so let me try to somehow force a draw. And that's what I did, play queen f3, and he took on e5. The threat is rook d7 right now, so this is kind of forcing the matters here. So he took on e5, and I took on b7 and offered a draw because, well, queen takes h5, queen takes a6, and yeah, this is just a draw. So he accepted the draw. And yeah, I'm not too unhappy about this game. Obviously, I would have liked to win. I had a chance. I had a much better position for most of the game. But I couldn't quite find it in a critical position where my opponent didn't have many moves. And I rushed things there. I rushed things even if it was the case that I didn't see the way to crush through, I maybe shouldn't have forced matters. But just take my time, maybe move around the king a little bit and just make some moves. Because it's really difficult for black to alleviate the pressure. I maybe could even go b4 to not allow any rook c5. Well, that would have maybe other problems. But I think that was a critical moment. This other missed win with rook takes d6. Well, okay. I think that's not so easy to find, obviously. So, good game. I'm fairly satisfied with it. Good defensive play by my opponent. And then the draw, the more or less, yeah, well, natural outcome. Okay, this was yet another Bundesliga analysis. I've already done a number of them before, so you can check them out in the description, or also up there. Maybe something will appear if I put it in there. And you can check them out as well. I recommend my games against Trigubov, and well, actually, they're all interesting. I don't recommend any games. Just look at what you like. All right, I'm out. Goodbye.